suicide in Jamaica. Please make time for the approach. Alright, there are various authors to this paper. I am one, including Dennis Joe, Fallon, Calvin, etc. as you can see here. So we have some interesting stuff to present to you today, and you can take notes and ask me questions at the end if you so desire. Now, the issue of suicide is something fundamental to not only Jamaica, but substantially it's an issue that has been going on for years. And a number of persons have looked at in terms of what are the factors influencing suicide. And some of those factors are demographic factors, and there are persons who have actually spoken about the demographic factors. And there's also psychological factors affecting suicide. And the homicide, we also call that homicide, was also a factor that influences suicide. Now, one of the reasons why we actually started this research was fundamentally because what we actually found on macrotrends.net to say that Jamaica's suicide rate is so low that many persons do not even want to examine the matter related to suicide because we are that low in terms of the world in terms of suicide rate. But when you see what I'm presenting here today, then you'll understand why it is important, even though the rate is low, to examine it is related to suicide. So, we are using Durkheim's theory to look at suicide, and Durkheim actually said long time ago, we're talking about in the 1897, that looked at suicide and said that there are some macro variables influencing suicide. Alright? And within that macro concept influencing suicide, we're taking that same macro concept of suicide to examine suicide in our island of Jamaica. So that is there. So we are forwarding today that the macroeconomic environment in Jamaica, that is poverty and unemployment, as well as homicide, is influencing suicide rates in Jamaica. So we want to test that theory. Is that true or is that not true? Now we collected data from the Jamaica Constabulary Force that looks at suicide, but they are entity that deals with that. Then Statistical Institute of Jamaica deals with homicide figures and other figures. So we are taking data from reputable sources to present you information today, and time series analysis will be used to examine that, in addition to, of course, the matter related to validation. We are unable to validate suicide data in Jamaica, fundamentally because the police is technically the only statutory body that's allowed to examine suicide. So we are accepting what the police is saying about suicide as is. So I hope you understand that clearly. Now, suicide can be taken in the context of one's taking his or her own life, but suicide can also be murder-suicide that has been occurring in Jamaica for some time now. And we also see that happening. I'm apologizing, we're working on some technical difficulties, so thank you very much. So let's look at the results now. We're examining suicides from 2000 to 2019. And we're looking at the suicide in terms of male, females, and we're looking at sex ratio. And sex ratio here, using statistics, is just simply males over females times 100. Alright, that's all it means. So what you're saying is that in 2000, the sex ratio of suicide in Jamaica was 600 to every 100 females, which means 600 in every 100 females, males every 100 females, and the ratio is there. So you see it in 2009, the ratio went up to as far as 1,700, indicating the number of males substantially that were committing suicides in Jamaica. 51 males to 3 females. That is how bad things were in 2009. Currently, well, when I say currently, according to 2019, we're talking about 51 suicides that are males compared to 7 suicides that are females. So, we are having a male suicide pandemic in Jamaica. So that is what I'm actually arguing today, that this male suicide pandemic will be addressed from a number of perspectives. So here we have, we're breaking up suicide in terms of males to females in terms of periods, 2000, 2009, 2010, 2019. And you realize in terms of the two periods, almost the same number of suicides have occurred in Jamaica for the two periods for males, and for females, marginal less suicides have been done from 2010 to 2019. We're talking about 539 suicides in 2010 to 2009, and 527 in 2010-2019. That is how bad suicide is in Jamaica, even though the rates are low. What do we mean by that now? So let's do it in terms of percentages. So we are saying in 2000-2004, 81% of the suicides in Jamaica were committed by males. It went up in 2000-2009 to 89% of the males. Fell in 2010-2014 to 86%. Rose in 2015-2019 to 89%. So I am saying to us here at NCU and the world that we are in a suicide pandemic, not epidemic, but a pandemic of suicide among our males that must be addressed. What are we saying? Between 2000 and 2019, a minimum of 81% of the cases of suicide were done by males. Now, what we have done, we have actually disaggregated the suicide here now in terms of gender, and you see the periods in terms of gender. And look at the distributions here in terms of gender. The red indicates the number of suicides committed by females, and the black indicates the number by males. So this is the pandemic that we are facing in Jamaica. A male suicide pandemic. Look at those figures. And they jump at you to say, okay then, what do we now do to solve this pandemic? This is how bad suicide is in Jamaica. Again, I present you here with some numbers for you to get an idea of what is going on in terms of a comparative analysis in giving you what happens in males related to females, and you realize the portion related to females is so small compared to the portion related to males. And that is my rationale for saying we're having a suicide pandemic of males in the country of Jamaica. Now, suicide in the world is not only computed by the number of people who commit suicide, but it's done based on rate per 100,000. So what we do, we take the population of Jamaica, and the populations are given you there, and we take the number of suicides that are committed each year. So the suicides over the population times 100,000 gives you the suicide rate per 100,000 population. So what are we saying? In 2000, approximately 3 Jamaicans committed suicide for every 100,000 Jamaicans existing. The rate has fallen to 2 per every 100,000. And Jamaica, I must say, is extremely low in terms of suicide rate, in terms of 2.0 per 100,000 compared to other areas. But when the figures are disaggregated, we realize that we're having a male suicide pandemic. Alright, here, what we did here now was to do a suicide rate as it relates to males and females, again summarizing what is happening to our country of Jamaica over the period that we are speaking about. What we want to do now is based on Durkheim's theory. Because Durkheim is saying, listen, suicide is a macroeconomic factor. So he's saying, based on the economy of a country, you can determine suicide. Let us see if Durkheim was talking the truth. Remember, Durkheim's theory was proposed in 1897, years ago. We're going to be testing that theory today. So let's look at the number of suicides. We're saying now, what I did now was look at suicide for males and suicide for females on a similar graph. And we found out based on the graph that the more females commit suicide in Jamaica is the more males commit suicide. Wow, that should shock you, right? So we are saying there's a relationship between females committing suicide and the male committing suicide thereafter. So this is where we are in this country of yours called Jamaica. Let's test Durkheim's theory. Durkheim said that poverty influences suicide. We test that theory here, and there's no relationship between poverty and suicide in Jamaica. So we have debunked Durkheim's theory relating to poverty and suicide. So what we can do now is eliminate one macroeconomic variable out of Durkheim's theory that related to poverty. Let's test the others. Another one was unemployment. What we found out is that there is a relationship between unemployment in society and suicide, but it's not your normal linear relationship. It's a parabola, curvilinear relationship, which means that suicide falls to a certain point, reaches its what? Its minimum, then it begins to climb. What we realize here from our graph is whenever the suicide rate in Jamaica goes beyond 12%, we see a substantial increase in suicides in Jamaica. So when suicides are low, it means that the unemployment in Jamaica is less than 12%. But whenever the unemployment begins to rise beyond 12%, you are expecting massive increases in what? In suicide. People not working, they are going to be committing what? Suicide beyond 12%. Another theory that Durkheim proposed, he said that homicide, which is murder, influences what? Suicide. When we actually did that modeling, it's a complex one to determine whether it is so or not, based on the graph that you are seeing. The relationship is so complex that there's no pattern, whether it's a linear pattern or a curvilinear pattern. It will just flow in cyclically from time to time. That's how complex the matter of murder is to suicide in Jamaica. So the murder-suicide relationship is a complex one in Jamaica, and not as straightforward as Durkheim forwarded in 1897. Now, all of the argument has been out in terms of suicide. So we are saying poverty does not influence suicide in Jamaica. That part has been eliminated from the what? Durkheim's model. What about unemployment that Durkheim forwarded? We agree with Durkheim, but we are saying the relationship Durkheim is not a linear one, not straightforward. It's a curvilinear one. Beyond a certain rate of what? Unemployment, you expect to see what? Increase in suicide. So that is modifying Durkheim's theory on that matter. The matter related to homicide that Durkheim forward, we are saying Durkheim, the matter is much more complex and requires further examination. So where we are today, one, we have dispelled poverty as influencing suicide. Two, we realize that there's a modification relating to what? Unemployment and what? Suicide. And the murder one is still indecisive. So much work is needed to be done to examine this thing, despite the what? Relationship relating to what? Suicide. So all the factors, and we can include more factors later. Psychological factors were not brought into this model. We can actually put those in this model later to understand what is happening to our country, Jamaica, with suicide. Remember I said that we spoke before that Jamaica's suicide rate is low. So because Jamaica's suicide rate is 2.09 per 100,000, which is close to the lowest in the world, many people do not think that suicide is a problem. But when you dissect the suicide figures, you realize that there's a male suicide pandemic in the country that you're living in. But initially, when you look at the figures, you're not alarmed by those figures. Now, we're saying, what do we now know? When Jamaica experienced unemployment, substantial unemployment, like in the 1990s, or even what happened before, recently related to COVID, we saw increase in unemployment. Increase in unemployment, and we saw increase in what? Suicide as well. But one of the things that is happening now that we did not actually examine in this study was the murder-suicide rates. And that is something that we should actually examine later. So all of this has been presented here. We are now fully aware as to what is happening with all matter related to suicide. We now understand how unemployment plays out in related to suicide in Jamaica. We understand the matter relating to poverty. Now where are we? We are forwarding that the matter relating to suicide must be taken into consideration. Why? If one person in Jamaica dies from suicide, it's important to be studied. And we are saying that is a fundamental reason. why this study examines suicide. Yes, we have debunked matter. Yes, we are doing very well in terms of the number of rates of suicide in Jamaica. But there's a male suicide pandemic that must be examined. And it must be examined now and not tomorrow. The WHO warned us about this matter linked to suicide. And ladies and gentlemen, 800,000 suicides are committed every year in Jamaica, in the world. And Jamaica is only 2.9% of that. Extremely low. And because the rate is that low in Jamaica, some people do not want to look at the matter. But here we are, square looking at it, that the suicide matter must be examined and examined quickly. Now, should we bring in more factors inside the suicide discussion? Absolutely. We have to examine any other social factors, like where persons live, what they do, their occupation, what time of the day they commit suicide, and all of those must be examined. But what we do not have in Jamaica is any repository that collects data on these issues. What we should do as of today is to ask that the Ministry of Health and other bodies begin to collect data so we can further examine what is happening to the suicide rate and why men are committing so many suicides. Why? And why the men are also committing so many murder-suicides. And why suicide of females influences suicide in males. We need to examine the why. Ladies and gentlemen, thank you very much.